Coming up in Fionnuala-Jane's music room.
A spooky Halloween story using cello sounds.
Learn and play and have a good time. Fionnuala-Jane's music room.
Good evening, my friends, and welcome to Fionnuala-Jane's music room. This evening I shall be telling you a tale of the ticking clock. On the edge of a small town of Ardmillan Creek stood an old dark house. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, with ivy climbing up its crooked walls and a tall creaky gate that always seemed to swing in the wind. The only sound louder than the howling wind was the slow, echoing tick-tock of the massive grandfather clock inside. One rainy evening, Joseph and his little sister Niamh were playing in their cosy home when their mother told them that they'd be staying with their Aunt Nora for the night. "The old house," Joseph whispered, his eyes wide. "It's not scary," their mother replied, though Niamh wasn't so sure. The children arrived at Aunt Nora's just before dark. Inside, the house was full of strange shadows and odd creaks. And right in the corner of the living room stood the tallest, oldest grandfather clock they had ever seen. It loomed over them, its pendulum swinging with a steady tick-tock, tick. "Don't worry," Aunt Nora kindly said. "It's just the clock keeping time. You'll hardly notice it." But that night, Joseph and Niamh did notice it. Lying in bed, they could hear the ticking down the hallway, louder and louder as the night grew darker. Just as the clock struck midnight, something even stranger happened. Joseph nudged Niamh awake. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Something is scratching." Sure enough, from the hallway they heard tiny footsteps. Scurry, scurry, scurry. Curious and a little bit scared, the siblings tiptoed out of bed and peeked into the hallway. There, in front of the towering grandfather clock, was a grey mouse. But this was no ordinary mouse. It stood on its hind legs, staring up at the clock as if it was waiting for something. The second of the clock's hand struck midnight again. The mouse pressed a tiny paw against the clock's base, and a secret door opened. Niamh and Joseph gasped in surprise. They had to find out what was inside. The mouse darted through the door, and without thinking twice, the children followed. Inside the clock they found a small hidden room filled with dusty books, shimmering bottles, and old wooden toys. It was as if the room had been frozen in time. The mouse stood proudly in the centre, nibbling on a crumb as if it had just led them to the most marvellous treasure. "Is this your room?" Niamh asked in amazement. The mouse gave a little squeak and nodded, pointing to an ancient book that lay open on the table. Written inside were the words, "Keeper of Time." The mouse was no ordinary mouse at all. It was the protector of the mysterious room, guarding its secrets until the clock struck midnight each night. From that day on, Joseph and Niamh would visit the hidden room every time they stayed in Aunt Nora's, knowing that they had a magical friend who lived inside the old dark house. And every night, the grandfather clock would keep their secret safe with its steady